everyone. My name is Sakthia Chandra. Welcome to the Tech Talk today. The title that we have is Preventing BEC and Spear Phishing Cyber Attacks on Microsoft Office 365 Email. Joining me are two participants. Let me introduce my first panelist here, Anand Raghavan, who's the co-founder and chief product officer at Armorblox. Anand, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Shakti. Hi, everyone. Excited to be on this webinar with you today and looking forward to sharing some of the real-life attacks that we have seen out there and the trends that we're seeing in terms of different kinds of attacks that are happening against Office 365 customers.
Wonderful, Anand. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We want to go a little bit deeper into phishing attacks because even within the world of email security, phishing attacks have become notorious. And to share some context, based on the FBI data points on their survey in their 2020 report, 110% increase year over year. So more than it has doubled, and the number of complaints is in the order of magnitude that we all don't want to see happening, right? So in the context of, again, just phishing attacks hitting enterprises, take a look at the Verizon data breach report here, which states that 36% of all breaches in 2020 had something to do with phishing attack. And the insult to injury here is maybe the third piece of data point, which is 14% of all users who have had at least 5 or more phishing training sessions still click on a phishing link. So it feels like there is absolutely no reprieve against these attacks that are coming our way. So the agenda of our Tech Talk today is really to understand a little bit in details on what are these phishing attacks, what are the different flavors of these we see out there. And obviously, the more we understand, the more we can be prepared to take the preventive action to protect our organizations. So here is a quick summary of the vector. When we say vector, it is really how the email is being delivered to the company. Pay close attention to the second column, which is the technique, because we fundamentally believe that the technique in email security and email attacks in particular has evolved exponentially in the last 5 to 7 years, not even beyond the 7-year horizon. Just in the last 5 to 7 years, we believe that the attackers have got so sophisticated in harnessing these techniques on getting the payload, and we'll talk more about the payload, which is in the third column here. It's almost like the invisible payload that they are armed with and dangerous. And finally, we will contrast with in terms of what do you have at your disposal and where do you have to look for in terms of innovation and technology to fight against these. So on the left-hand side, that is bolded up in the font here, you see 5 different categories. And these are the 5 categories that I would like to have Anand help us unpack the details around. Let me just quickly run through the list here. There is the flavor of VIP impersonation, or the veiling attacks, as some people like to call it in the industry. Payroll fraud and vendor fraud is very, very interesting because it not only takes email security on the face of it, it combines email security and looks for vulnerabilities in the business workflow, and the combination of those two becomes really, really potent. Down the order, not by any means on the priority list, is the credential phishing, which is probably the most prevalent that you're going to see. And you can almost guarantee that every one of the organization has seen some form of credential phishing out there today. And finally, the notorious account takeovers, which is, it could be an account takeover internally at your organization, or it could be even a third party or a vendor account that's been compromised. So we'll unpack all this in the context of phishing attacks that we see in the market, in the world today. The way I would like to do this is maybe showcase some of the real life examples where possible that our research team has been able to unearth, and then use this as the context in a Microsoft Office 365 email environment on how these phishing attacks are able to seep through some of the best prevention techniques that you might already have in place today. Let's take a first look at this example. It is a classic brand impersonation. And the email is pretty innocuous. It is almost very informative. And all it says is, can you please log into a Bank of America account to access some of the messages that the end user might be interested in. And let me fast forward to the next slide here, just to walk you through, and I would like you, Anand, to help us understand a little bit more detail about the propagation of the threat, and also in the context of an Office 365 environment, why this threat was able to get into the organization, right? So let me just set the stage for you here very quickly. The attack type is impersonating a brand. This happens to be Bank of America, and an email was sent by a very valid Yahoo account. There is a zero-day phishing link that you see in the center, and when end users click on it, obviously they are taken to a login page that looks pretty much almost similar to a production environment of Bank of America. But Anand, why don't you take it from here and help us understand a little bit more in detail here?
Yeah, and while I do that, if I can also plug another webinar that we have on our website, there's one around cognitive biases and how those impact how we perceive these kind of attacks. That actually goes into some of these different kinds of biases. So in this particular case, this is what they call an authority bias, right? So here is a brand that you recognize really well. It's something that you get emails from very often. So you're familiar with getting emails like this in your inbox. So it says Bank of America, you're more vulnerable to assuming that it is. So that's the first part of that where the attacker catches you off guard. It's a kind of email that you're used to seeing. The second part of it is that it previously, if you look at your traditional secure email gateway, or you look at what Microsoft Office 365 does, they have billions of signals that they get every day, which protects you against a lot of mass phishing campaigns from known bad sites. And that removes a lot of volume-based attacks from your inbox. Something like this, an attacker makes it super targeted. So it's hosted on a site that is not yet being taken down. It's not yet been flagged as malicious anywhere just yet. So that link, whether the URL is rewritten, whether one of these products is actually going to inspect that URL and just see if it isn't on any list, it's going to come back as safe.
So you talked about a couple of data points I want to just double click on. You mentioned that this is a email attack that we saw in real life that our threat research team was able to uncover, which meant that even though it had a bad URL, maybe it is because in this day and age, it is easier to set up a valid DNS, a valid URL. There's absolutely no way if it's a zero-day phishing link on a zero-day phishing DNS hosted website for any system to catch, because it is just a valid set of parameters that the attackers are using. And it is as easy for them to spin it up and spin it down. And you also mentioned that this email didn't have any malicious payload. It was just language and the content that they used to hook the user to click on and then move on to where they want the user to be at.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And if you talk to the legacy secure email gateways, one of the things they mention is, yes, of course, we eventually catch it. What they mean is, if somebody manually reports this as a suspicious email and there's a manual review and they realize that it is bad, they do a look back maybe 7-8 hours later or several days later sometimes and pull it out from people's mailboxes. And they have additional SKUs that they sell, which kind of do that pull back from mailboxes. But 8 hours or several days is too late for somebody to have already taken a bad action on an email like this. So you need real-time intervention.
Yeah, and I would even argue, even if this email traffic was parsed through the most sophisticated firewall infrastructure, or even for that matter, any virtualized endpoint security infrastructure, these zero-day attacks are completely notorious because you just don't have any signatures. You just don't have any history to flag it as, yeah, it's bad or it's good. You really have to get into the details of the email. And that is exactly the weapon that the attackers have these days, right? As much as the work that they put in impersonating the brand that is here to fool the end user to speak of, it is also the power of the language that they use to unpack. It's great. So let's move on to the next thread. It is favorably called the veiling attack. Obviously, the VIP impersonation, the email that you see here, just to set the context, it is from the CEO of a company asking perhaps one of their colleagues to go buy iTunes gift cards. Our threat research team sees this over and over again, where this has almost become the Nigerian prince threat vectors that we all are aware of. Again, very simple email impersonating a VIP in a company. And this is another threat that would definitely seep in, irrespective of the levels of protection or prevention that you have based on the traditional email tools out there.
Yeah, so an attack like this poses some interesting set of challenges in terms of when you think about how to prevent it using the traditional rules-based approach that the secure email gateways have gotten us used to, the legacy solutions. The first problem is that it is sent from a public email provider. So I cannot block all yahoo.com email IDs. I cannot rely on email authentication. In this particular case, DMARC, DKIM, SPF, they will all pass. It's coming from a yahoo.com email address. So those signals are not very useful. The email address keeps changing. The attackers, it's zero cost for them to set up a new Yahoo ID or Gmail ID. So you cannot just block that particular sender. I mean, you should, but the next time around, they're most definitely not going to use the same email address. So that's always a frontier that keeps changing. The other thing that you can try to do is to actually put in a rule inside of your environment that says that if Alex Chamberlain is the CEO, any email that comes in with Alex as the first name and Chamberlain as the last name, if that's not his work email address, you can block that email saying it's bad. It works for the most part. Of course, there is a small corner case of the CEO legitimately sending personal emails on the personal email address into the company. But the bigger problem is that attackers figure out ways around it. So they might create an ID with the name as Alex Chamberlain, CEO, or Alex, the two spaces and Chamberlain. So different ways in which your regex pattern breaks so that these emails still make it through. So that's another challenge that you cannot really figure out a way to consistently block all possible variations of that. The other thing, people try to put in rules that says, okay, if it says gift card or it says iTunes, it says Walmart, the common kinds of gift card scams, attackers have usually figured out ways around that as well. They try to say the same thing in different words so that keyword-based rules also are not able to catch emails like this. Now, if you were to process this email as a human and just think what are the pieces that stand out for you for your kind of red alert signals to go up, there's a few things in here. The first thing is you can clearly see that there's a request being made. They're asking the user to do something, right? As a human, we can clearly see that. The second thing you see is there is some urgency in here. The attacker is pretending to be the CEO and asking someone to do it in a big hurry. I need this in the next 2 hours. So that catches our eye as well. And the last part, of course, is that there is a financial conversation going on. There is $2,000 worth of iTunes gift card. So as a human, when we read it, if it took time, we can actually see that this email is bad. Now, most of us on this call are people that are trained, that are technical, that are probably more security aware than the average employee inside of an organization. And unfortunately, mails like this trick people that are not as security aware. So that's one of the challenges when you have emails like this slipping past.
Thanks, Anand. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And the comment that you made about, yeah, you can do this by regex and policies that most companies attempt to set it. If you're able to do the explosion of all the permutations and combinations of everything that you could potentially read behind the mind of an attacker, but we all know that is a completely losing proposition. Even on day one, if you started with the best blueprint, best templates, we all know that it's not going to stand the test of time. And there is a better way that we need to think about in the industry on how to solve this, right? Because again, based on what we are seeing from our threat research team, even though this might look as an innocuous, pretty banal email attack, we see this more and more common of our customers, prospects falling prey into such attacks. So let's keep moving on. Let's take another example of a business workflow compromise. So this is my favorite topic, where it is almost the level of sophistication goes a little bit deeper, because here the attackers have combined the public knowledge of some of the business workflows that they can gather by just observing from the outside of the company, or in some instances, the business workflows are publicly available, mandated information, specifically in the federal and the state government, where if you are provisioning or if you're doing payroll, you have to publish the date of the payroll that you're getting processed within your agency, right? So when attackers have that information, then again, it becomes really potent on how they can construct these emails to combine both the email vector, the security aspects of it, with the business workflow and look for vulnerabilities and gaps in it.
Yeah, and here is where we use the term business workflow here pretty deliberately. Everyone that's listening to this, I encourage you to do this exercise. If you just look at how many emails you go through in a week and see in how many of them you are actually making a decision over email, approving invoices, requesting change of payroll information, or approving sending W-2s to somebody inside of the organization, sensitive information being exchanged. There's a lot of actual business actions that are happening every day inside of our communication channels, predominantly email. And if I'm someone in the payroll department, I'm used to getting emails like this. Also, the typical stereotype, someone in the payroll department is not as security conscious as somebody that is in the security team themselves. So I'm in the payroll department. I'm used to seeing emails like this. I get an email. Rupert might be somebody who is just started at my company, so I don't really know what his personal email address might have been. Or he might be somebody that's just leaving the company and this is the last paycheck that needs to be sent. Either way, or it could be a regular employee. Either way, the fact that it's a Gmail ID sometimes doesn't even show properly when I'm looking at it, say, on my mobile phone, where unless I click into the name and take that extra 5-10 seconds to look at it, I'm not aware that it's not their work email address. So this is something that I do day in and day out in my job as a payroll admin, and instinctively I respond to this. One of the interesting things that we have seen as we talk to a lot of customers is how prevalent this is across so many different organizations that we work with, that such emails keep happening all the time. And companies have had to put several layers of manual processes to kind of stop something like this from coming in because they don't have the technology to kind of stop most of these from coming in the first place.
The mobile device comment that you made is such an astounding data point. I would encourage everyone to look at, because I believe it's over north of 80% of consumption of email traffic happens over a smaller form factor, where in this email, you are seeing that Rupert heading has @gmail.com, but if you're looking at this email on a mobile or a small format device, you're just not going to be able to see the entire address. Probably all you get to see is the first name and the last name, depending on the client that you use on the small form factor.
The email providers have, and legacy providers have started trying to fix this by attaching an external tag to any email that's not coming from the work email domain. The challenge there is that for many of us, most of our email comes from external domains. So one of the things our brain is very good at is tuning out information that is unnecessary. Things we see all the time, the brain just tunes it out. I'm sure many of you would have seen that video where they ask you to watch a group of people playing, I think it was basketball, passing the ball around, and ask you to see if you saw anything interesting in that video. I'm not going to break the surprise. You should go look for that video online. So when something that is there all the time, your brain just focuses on that and you don't pay attention to other things, right? So in this particular case, you are actually looking at the external tag every single day. So you just don't notice it. And in this particular email, even if it was there, you may not have seen it because you see that tag all the time.
Wonderful. Let's move to our next phishing attack, the vendor compromise. Again, I don't think we need to go rehash what happened with SolarWinds. It is top of mind for everyone related to security. Again, this is just very notorious, right? You could have the best safeguards within your infrastructure, but what happens when one of your vendors' account gets compromised? The question I have here, Anand, is the email industry has definitely made great strides in terms of protocols. Some are open standards, some are proprietary, DMARC, SPF, DKIM. You can just go through the alphabet soup. Wouldn't you paint us first in the context of how are they going to help us prevent, if they can? And also, again, why would such an email attack would come through the best of the defenses that you can get in Office 365?
Yeah. So to set the stage, this is a vendor that is working with a particular company, and on a regular basis, the vendor sends across invoices, right? And in this particular email, the vendor is saying that, look, our CFO is asking us to migrate the accounts to a different account, so start paying this invoice to a new bank account number. Now, many of your companies do work with organizations where DMARC may not be configured properly. Even though you might have requested them to do so, there might be a small accounting firm where they don't have the IT team to go configure their DMARC properly. So their DKIM and SPF might be failing as normal course of events, even for legitimate emails. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is, even if DMARC was passing, even if DKIM and SPF were passing, if there's an account takeover and a legitimate email comes from that account, there's no way of knowing that difference, because email authentication is still going to pass. So email authentication as a signal is not really very useful from a vendor account takeover perspective. That's the first problem. The second problem is that what Shakti highlighted, you might have invested a lot in tools and tech to make sure that you are not compromised, that your users are safe. It still does not protect you with the traditional stack against what they call vendor fraud or third-party risk or supply chain risk. So you are only as vulnerable as the weakest link in your environment, right? So in this particular case, a vendor that you work with has gotten compromised. And one of the first things the attacker does when they log in is to see what kind of communications happen. And they've discovered that, okay, this is great. This vendor sends out a monthly invoice to your organization. And the vendor goes in, the attacker goes in and sends a new invoice with new banking information. There is no malicious payload. There is no malicious link. There is no other signatures of something bad that's happening here, other than the fact that the compromise is of the human trust. It's trying to compromise the trust of the person on the receiving end in the accounts payable team and making them believe that this is actually a legitimate request. If you look at the FBI IC3 report from last year, a huge chunk of dollars get lost purely in these kind of invoice fraud kind of attempts, despite organizations investing a lot in securing themselves, because it's very hard to identify things like this that are third-party risk related.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anand. Let's go to the next attack type in phishing. It's credential phishing, probably the most common of all the different kinds of phishing attack. This email, it's very simple, like most of the other emails that we saw, which is it calls for an urgent action on behalf of the end user. And all it says is, hey, log in here. You got an urgent security message on your account. And it happens to be on Verizon. And when the user goes through, obviously clicking on the link, just to look at what that secure message is, they have fallen prey and they have gone into a landing page, which obviously has been mocked up and it is hosted by the attacker in a different domain here. The question I have here is, email is such a critical part of authentication, everything from changing the account, trying to access, obviously, the details of what happens behind a particular website. And end users, consumers, typically don't have the sophistication of going through and unpacking the checklist, if you may, on their consumer emails, right? Is it just relegated to the consumer side of the house, or do you think this is also prevalent on the enterprise side of the house?
Well, this kind of attack happens a lot on the enterprise side as well. In many kinds of industries, you are issued a work-related device, and you get alerts like this that are related to your work-related device. So even in the enterprise setting, this is very common. This attack is malicious at several levels. I mean, first is, even if I'm a security-aware employee inside of an organization, one of the things that I'm constantly taught is a lot of my identity rests in my phone. If I'm doing 2FA, access to my bank accounts, everything else, access to my work email, a lot of confidential data I carry around related to my work. So people are always worried about SIM jacking or their account getting compromised or some security alert happening around their mobile device itself. That's where this email, the content of this email is so malicious. Even if I'm security aware, it actually makes me want to go click and take action right away because it says there is a security message that I should respond to. And then, of course, the rest of the attack follows through because they have got me on that hook that my company has trained me to take action on security things right away. Here is a security related alert. I automatically take action.
Sometimes the best of the training can have the worst of the intentions too. You know, he is preying on the proactive end user who wants to read that secure message. Right. Unfortunately, you know, falling prey to a phishing attack here. Let's wrap it up with some new innovative phishing attacks. They go in the long tail, but we're going to highlight just one of them. There is different flavors of this: Vishing, smishing, and the vocabulary just continues to expand. but this is essentially an interesting attack in the sense that it follows similar patterns, but then there is that phone number that you see here in the bottom of the email, which takes the end user to maybe get compromised by talking to a human. So this is almost combining the automation with the human element to see how the defense can be breached.
Yeah, and then here it preys on something that's so foundational to who we are as human beings, right? Our curiosity. This is probably an order that we did not place. I've gotten my share of this in my personal email as well as a couple of times that I've seen in our customer environments where our customers have gotten this too, where it's an order that I did not place. I have an email that says, hey, looks like you made this order. Here is a number to call us and let us know if there is a problem with the shipping, right? So instantly I want to know, hey, I didn't place this. Somebody gifted to me. I mean, especially this time of the year, the holidays are here. Maybe some work colleague or maybe some organization I work with send me a gift. So I want to call that number. So my defenses are already down because I really want to satisfy my curiosity. We have called several of these numbers, and you'd be surprised to know there's people on the other side. They'll instantly start asking you questions in a social engineering way to get more information about you. There may not be a hook there to kind of steal something from you right away, but the information they collect is going to use them launch a bigger attack focused on you later on or focused on your organization. And that's where they collect the information. Very similar one that happens is also with QR codes, where you get an email with a QR code and asks you to scan that and takes you to a site. But they are evolving away from links and attachments because the traditional solutions, that's predominantly what they catch. So these are ways in which attackers can evade those entirely.
Thanks, Anand. So that concludes the quick roundup of different kinds of phishing attacks. As you saw at the beginning of the talk, this is one of the most hottest topic when it comes to email security. And we specifically picked some examples from our threat research team that they are observing on a Microsoft Office 365 environment. So hopefully this gave you a bird's eye view of understanding the different types of attacks, why they happen, what are some of the techniques that the attackers are using, and how to think about what you might already have in terms of email security, and also analyze the gaps on what you should be looking forward to obviously better defend and protect your organization. And that concludes our first part of the Tech Talk series on the topic of PEC and spear phishing attacks on Microsoft Office 365 email. Hope you all enjoyed it. Please tune in for the second part, where we will cover the future and the road forward to solve some of these vicious email-based attacks that we see in the environment today. Thank you.